Have you ever had that moment, right after an achievement, where instead of feeling proud, you feel anxious? Like any minute now, someone's going to realize you're not as smart, not as capable, not as talented as they thought. Maybe you got the job, the promotion, the recognition, but deep down, you're convinced it was luck, timing, or just good acting. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. This feeling has a name: Imposter Syndrome. The belief that your success isn't real, that you've somehow tricked people into overestimating you. And here's the surprising part. The people who struggle with it most aren't slackers or amateurs. They're the ones who are actually good at what they do. Think about that. Some of the most competent, accomplished people, CEOs, doctors, artists, scientists, walk around feeling like they don't belong at the table they earned a seat at. Why? Why do so many people, no matter how much they achieve, still feel like they're never enough? Is it just humility? A fear of failure? Or is there something deeper at play? Before we can break free from this cycle, we have to understand what's really going on, why our own minds turn against us the moment we start to succeed. No one is born feeling like a fraud. That feeling is planted, usually early, in the way we are taught to see ourselves. Maybe you grew up in a home where love felt earned, where praise came only after an achievement, and mistakes felt like disappointments rather than learning experiences. Or maybe you were labeled early on, the smart one, the responsible one. Titles meant as compliments, but ones that made you feel like you had something to prove every single day. And if you ever failed, if you ever struggled, it felt like you were letting people down, like you were failing your identity itself. Add to that the constant comparisons, siblings, classmates, the kid who always seemed to do just a little better, and suddenly, success stops feeling like something to celebrate. It becomes something to protect, something you are terrified of losing. Fast forward to adulthood, and that pressure doesn't go away. It just changes shape. We now live in a world where perfection is performative, especially online. Scroll through social media, and it looks like everyone has it figured out. Flawless careers, effortless achievements, confidence on demand. But what you're seeing isn't reality. It's a highlight reel. A carefully curated version of success that makes your own struggles feel unusual, even though they're completely normal. When the world only shows its victories, it's easy to feel like the only one who doubts themselves. Then there's the culture we live in, one that ties self-worth to productivity. You are praised when you achieve, invisible when you rest, and judged when you fail. In a system that measures your value by output, it's no surprise that people start to believe they are only as good as their last accomplishment. And so, the fear creeps in. If I stop achieving, will I still matter? Imposter syndrome thrives in environments where busyness is mistaken for worth, and where self-doubt is seen as weakness instead of what it really is, a universal part of being human. And that's a serious problem. No one teaches us that feeling uncertain doesn't mean you're incapable. No one tells us that self-doubt isn't proof of being a fraud, it's proof that you care. So, instead we keep quiet, convinced that everyone else has some secret confidence we missed out on. But what if they don't? What if everyone, even the most successful people you admire, feels this way? And what if the real difference between them and you isn't talent or intelligence, but the simple fact that they stopped letting doubt make decisions for them? Living with imposter syndrome is like carrying a secret, a quiet, persistent fear that one day people will figure out you're not as capable as they think. This feeling isn't just an occasional doubt. It's a weight that follows you into every achievement, whispering that you don't really deserve it. And what is the result of this? Chronic anxiety, a constant state of waiting for the moment you'll be exposed. And because you feel like you have to prove yourself over and over, you push harder, work longer, exhaust yourself trying to meet an invisible standard. This cycle of overworking and self-doubt leads straight to burnout, where exhaustion isn't just physical, it's emotional, leaving you drained and disconnected from the very things you once enjoyed. But the damage doesn't stop at stress and exhaustion, it starts to erode self-worth. No matter how much you accomplish, it never feels like enough. You dismiss your past successes as luck, downplay your abilities, and assume that the next challenge will finally reveal your shortcomings. And the cruel irony? The more you achieve, the stronger this fear becomes. Instead of building confidence, success just raises the stakes, making the possibility of failure feel even more catastrophic. You start to believe that the only reason you've made it this far is because you've managed to fool people, and sooner or later, that luck will run out. This fear doesn't just affect how you feel, it affects what you do. Opportunities come, but you hesitate. A promotion, a leadership role, a chance to put your ideas into the world, but instead of stepping forward, you hold back. You tell yourself you're not ready, not qualified, that someone else would be better suited for the role. The fear of failure becomes a fear of visibility, because the more visible you are, the greater the risk of people seeing through the illusion you've convinced yourself is real. And in the worst cases, this fear turns into self-sabotage, procrastination, perfectionism, avoiding risks altogether. Not because you aren't capable, but because deep down, you've convinced yourself you don't belong. And here's the reality: no one is immune to this. Some of the most accomplished people in history have felt exactly this way. Albert Einstein once said he feared people would think of him as an involuntary swindler. Maya Angelou, despite writing some of the most celebrated books in history, admitted that every time she published a new one, she was afraid she'd finally be found out. Even Stephen Gadsby, a leading researcher on this very topic, has confessed to battling it himself. And if some of the greatest minds and creators of our time have felt like imposters, what does that tell us? It tells us that imposter syndrome isn't a reflection of your abilities. It's a distortion of your perception. Studies show that nearly 70% of people experience it at some point in their lives. That means the majority of people around you, colleagues, friends, even the ones you look up to, have, at one time or another, felt exactly the way you do now. So, if this feeling is so widespread, maybe the problem isn't that we aren't good enough. Maybe the real problem is that we were never taught to recognize our own worth. Imposter syndrome is more than a feeling. It's a pattern of distorted thinking. Your brain takes in evidence of your success, but twists it, convincing you that it doesn't really count. One of the most common distortions is the luck fallacy, the belief that your achievements happened by accident. Got the job? They must have been short on candidates. Did well on a project? It was just an easy task. Every win gets chalked up to external factors, timing, connections, luck, while every struggle is taken as proof that you're not actually capable. Eventually, this mindset makes success feel random, like something you don't own, but something that could be taken away at any moment. Then there's discounting achievements, where no matter what you accomplish, it never seems like a big deal. You convince yourself that anyone could have done it, that it wasn't hard enough to count. This feeds directly into perfectionism, the idea that unless something is flawless, it's a failure. You set impossibly high standards for yourself, and when you inevitably fall short, because perfection doesn't exist, it reinforces the fear that you're not good enough. And since perfectionists often procrastinate, afraid that anything less than perfect will expose them, you end up avoiding risks altogether, which only strengthens the belief that you're incapable. But perhaps the biggest mental trap of all, the Dunning-Kruger effect, flipped in reverse. The original Dunning-Kruger study found that incompetent people tend to overestimate their abilities because they don't know what they don't know. But the flip side is just as important. Highly competent people tend to doubt themselves because they're aware of how much they don't know. The more skilled you become, the more you recognize the gaps in your knowledge, which makes you feel less qualified. This is why true experts often struggle with confidence, while the least competent people are often the most sure of themselves. And the consequences? Research shows that imposter syndrome isn't just a harmless doubt. It's directly linked to increased anxiety, lower self-esteem, and career stagnation. People who struggle with it are less likely to ask for promotions, less likely to take creative risks, and more likely to burn themselves out trying to prove their worth. As I said, the ones battling these doubts the hardest are often the ones who are the most capable. Which raises a crucial question. If our minds are this unreliable when judging our own worth, then maybe it's time to stop trusting every thought we have about ourselves. The first step to breaking free from imposter syndrome is awareness, recognizing it for what it is, a pattern, not a truth. Pay attention to when these thoughts show up. Do they creep in after a success, before starting something new? Instead of accepting them as reality, step back and separate facts from feelings. Just because you feel like a fraud doesn't mean you are one. Your emotions are real, but they're not always right. The brain is wired to look for threats, even imaginary ones, so the fear of being exposed is often nothing more than your mind playing defense. You are not in danger. You are growing. Once you see the pattern, challenge the narrative. Keep a wins journal where you write down your achievements, big and small. On days when doubt creeps in, go back and remind yourself of the proof that you do belong where you are. And ask yourself, would I ever speak to a friend the way I speak to myself? If someone you cared about was doubting their worth, you wouldn't say, "You don't deserve this, you just got lucky." So why do you say it to yourself? If the way you think about yourself wouldn't be acceptable for someone else, it shouldn't be acceptable for you either. The next step, embrace imperfection. You don't have to be flawless to be worthy. Growth comes from trying, failing, learning, and improving, not from being perfect from the start. Every time you make a mistake or struggle with something new, it's not proof that you're a fraud, it's proof that you're human. The most successful people in the world didn't get there by avoiding failure, they got there by learning from it. If you're constantly waiting to feel ready before taking the next step, you'll be waiting forever. Progress is always more valuable than perfection. And finally, talk about it. The more you keep imposter syndrome hidden, the more power it has over you. But when you open up, whether to friends, mentors, or even professionals, you realize just how common it is. The truth is, the people you admire, the ones who seem the most confident, have felt exactly the same way. The only difference is that they didn't let self-doubt make their decisions for them. You are not an imposter. You are a human being with strengths, flaws, and endless potential. And you are far more capable than your self-doubt will ever allow you to believe. It's time to stop hiding and start owning who you are.